So, before we get started, tell your friends and family that this movie that you just watched is opening on January 19th?
January 19th.
January 19th.
At the IFC.
At the IFC Center. All right, so if I could switch gears super quick for a second. You have another movie out soon as well, which is known as Drift. Catch that as well. But I wanted to use that to talk to this idea about feeling adrift. Because in that movie, you have an African woman and an American woman in Greece. You know, in this movie, you have outsiders to this city, people who feel like they're in states of transition and people who feel adrift. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit to that theme and what draws you towards it in your movies.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating when you say that, because when I start looking back at my films, you know, this is my fourth feature. I made my first film, Ilo Ilo, Wet Season in Singapore, and then Drift, which was in Sundance this year, and then The Breaking Ice that premiered in Cannes. And, you know, I was, you know, it's odd, you know, as you grow older, you start to psychoanalyze yourself as a filmmaker. And when you look back at all your films, when I look at all my films, it's all a recurring theme, you know, it's all about the outsider. In my first film, it was about a Filipino maid, a Filipino helper, and a 10-year-old child. In my second film, it was a Malaysian teacher, you know, who was having a midlife crisis and was struggling to fit into Singapore society. And then you've got Drift and this film. And I think I've always been an outsider all my life. You know, I grew up in Singapore. I grew up in a very English-speaking family. You know, I still remember my father had all these vinyl records and he was listening to Elvis Presley all the time. We only had the English paper. We spoke English at home. But somehow I fell in love with Mandarin, with Chinese in primary school. And so in a way, I felt like, you know, the odd child, the outsider, even in my home country. And then later on, I did film school in Singapore. I did film school in the UK. I've lived in the UK and London for 15 years. You know, I've a lot of friends there. I've got a lot of connections there. But I don't feel British as well. I think it's this sense of feeling, like you said, you know, adrift. You know, I feel like I'm constantly looking for a sense of identity, a sense of who I am, and what I am. And I'm not sure. I think I'm relegated to the fact that I'm not sure I would ever find an answer. I'm not sure if I will ever find a sense of this is what I am. Which is why, you know, the two films that you mentioned that I made, you know, I made these two films, Drift and The Breaking Ice, last year, but they were both films that were not made in my home country in Singapore. They were made in, you know, like in Greece, you know, in
I was
the northern
12
part
years
of
old.
China bordering North Korea. And
The Prime Minister
what
was
is interesting is
assassinated
even when I
by
make
two of her own
films,
bodyguards.
in a foreign place,
The
in a
men wore
strange
turbans,
place.
just like me.
I think because of my background, I never bring any
My
judgment
family and I practice a religion
You know,
called
I-
Sikhism.
I go
In
with
our
an open
faith,
heart, with an
all
open
men
mind.
and even some women
I'm not sure
wear a
if that
turban.
answers your question, but
It definitely
symbolizes
does,
our
sort of
belief
bringing people
that all people are
into
created equal.
outsidership in a way.
yeah, but I feel like that's the only way I know how to make my films. You
But
know,
after that assassination,
an outsider.
our turbans
You know,
made us
kind of like
targets.
you know,
Angry
north of
mobs
China, you know, the
hunted
Chinese Ukraine
and
conflict,
murdered
like,
thousands of Sikhs.
It is a lot of baggage, culturally, politically, and historically. But there's no way I
No
can make
part of
a-
me felt
a
Indian
northeastern
anymore.
Dongdae film, you know, because I never lived in China. I never grew up in China. The only way I could make a film is through the eyes of an outsider.
I was born
Which
in
is why it was
Washington,
very
D.C.,
important for me when I
the
wrote the
first
script.
American
There were
citizen in my
three
family.
people that were from
My parents
different
raised me and my
parts,
brother there
they were all
while
lost
my
and
dad
stuff,
was
and they
working at
ended
the
up
Indian
there.
embassy.
You know, they were all
But after a few years,
they were all
my parents
passing
missed their
through, you know,
community.
like,
So they decided to pack up and move us to India.
I also wanted to speak about the origin of this
As a
film.
teenager,
There's a little
I
bit you
dreamt
told
of
me,
being back in
about
America
a conversation
and immersed myself in
with a
American culture.
Chinese writer, kind of
As soon
challenged
as
you
I
in a
turned
way
18,
to do
I
things
was
a
on the
little
next plane back.
differently, than you had with
My name is Vishwajit Singh, and
was
I
hoping
am
to,
an American Sikh.
But if
Yeah, it was quite fascinating. You know, I think the origins of the film really came during
Finally,
the pandemic.
I was
My
home.
second film,
It was beautiful.
you know, premiered in 2019 in Toronto at TIFF, and then
But
it was released
I
in
didn't
2020,
receive the warm welcome
the worst year ever.
I was expecting.
Yeah. I don't even know what that means. You know, it was released virtually.
I never felt so alone.
I hate that word. And I remember because of that, I was doing a lot of interviews via Zoom, and
I decided
it wasn't
to do
just one, but there were a
what
few
no one in my family
critics,
had
journalists that
ever
were
done.
saying, "Oh, your films are so precise, your script is so precise, your mise en scène is so precise, your editing is so precise. It feels so
When my
like you're such a
father
control freak."
found
I mean,
out,
I'm an Aries,
he
I'm a control
refused to
freak, you know?
speak to anyone
Sadly.
for weeks.
And I was asked this question
Cutting my
by
hair
a Chinese
and abandoning my
journalist, like,
turban meant
what is
I
it
was
like
no longer sick.
if Anthony Chen frees himself?
But
What is it
fitting
like to be
in
alive?
presented a new challenge. I didn't
Nothing
know
else for 2 years.
what was
It
it.
stayed with me. No,
I began trying different
hard time,
identities,
you know, like during those
religions.
2 years, because I felt so
None
depressed.
felt quite
It
right.
didn't help that I had a film that was released during
After
the pandemic.
10 years
I
of
remember
searching,
I was doing
I had a
like
dream one
watch
morning.
promotion in France for like 2 weeks, and then when the film
My grandfather came to me
you know, a week
with the
later,
6
Europe went
scriptures.
into lockdown. And then, you know, I was supposed to go to Hong Kong for the festival.
The opening words
for the film
describe a
festival.
timeless and formless energy that binds all living
And
beings.
then the festival got cancelled and postponed. And
The purpose of the Sikh faith is to connect to that energy. And for the first time, I felt it.
Wet season when I was released in Malaysia, played for one.
I felt a new desire to stand out as myself rather than blend in as miserable.
And I felt so depressed when
But being
when cinemas
myself
closed around
was
the world
about
and
to get a
film
lot
production
more
stopped,
difficult.
and I saw like everyone was just moving on to the devices. They were like, you know, scrolling through TikTok and social media and all of that, Netflix, and I was thinking this is the beginning of the end, you know. And I'm pretty sure, like, you know, people are back at cinemas. You know, like cinemas reopen.
Within hours,
audiences will
there
come
was
back.
news of Sikhs being attacked.
And I wasn't sure I had a real existential crisis. Whether it still exists as a film. Whether people still want to go and watch my films on the big screen because they're such gentle and quiet films. So I was feeling very miserable and depressed, and I had a lot of time. You know, my wife isn't from the industry; she works in finance, and you know, she was literally
I don't feel at home
even more
anymore.
hours. She was on, you know, she was on the computer all the time. She was doing all these meetings, and I was like the house husband. You know, I was taking care of our 18-year-old. I was doing the groceries. I was doing the cooking. I was doing the cleaning. I was doing the laundry. And during the pandemic, you wash a lot of
I used to be
clothes, you know?
seen as an outsider.
Yeah, I felt,
But now,
especially if you have a young child,
see
you're
me as a
so
villain.
afraid of catching the virus. I felt like I was just doing like laundry 3 times a day, and all of a sudden, I lost my identity as a filmmaker. You know, and
I
at
got
the
a
time
strange
had
idea.
A lot of, you know, I had a lot of time to read.
If I'm
and I
going
was
to
reading a
stand
lot
out,
of news
I want people to
articles,
see
and I read
me,
about
not as an
I don't know
outsider,
why, maybe it was-
but as I
it was the
am,
pandemic that
is
sort of
sick
like
and
forced,
an American.
You know, a lot of those emotions to the forefront. Yeah. I read a lot of articles about young people, about China, you know,
For the first time,
in London and UK at the time.
I
still remember,
became
like, there was a
sick
huge giant
Captain
thing on
America.
Front page, Britain's lost generation. And you felt like the young generation was struggling with something. You know, I was reading about their anxiety, their struggles with mental health, you know, their feeling of disappointment and being let down by the previous generation, by the establishment, by the governments. And then I went on to read a lot of blogs of young people because I was very intrigued, you know, and then vlogs as well. I didn't even know there was something called vlogs that existed, you know, because I would never do that. I would never put a camera in front of myself and record my life, you know, like what I eat and what I do and all that. And I was so fascinated, and I felt this, you know, like everyone was struggling and having different challenges, you know, different young people. But I felt collectively there was this collective melancholia. There was this universal sadness. And I was trying to understand that, you know, and I wanted to capture that in a film, which is why you have this film. And I've never made a film about young people in my films. You know, my first film was a family drama. My second film was about a 40-year-old woman, you know, having a midlife crisis. I mean, I've not made a film about young people in their 20s. So I was thinking, like, how do I start? So I thought to myself, okay, what are you know, like, what's some of the best films that captured the spirit of youth, that captured, you know, a generation of young people? And the first film that came into my head was Francois Truffaut's Jules and Jim. And it just stayed in my head. I didn't, you know, for me, it wasn't about copying a film or duplicating or imitating something. So it wasn't about, you know, like putting on the DVD and rewatching it again and again. I saw it like at film school. I saw it several times over Christmas in my adult life. But I thought about that, and I you know, I remember that sense of liberation. It was so freeing. I mean, it was the French New Wave, right? And that film had two guys and a girl, and decided, okay, I'm going to write a film about two guys and a girl, and that was how it started.
There you go. Speaking of that, tapping into that freeing feeling, this is a film which, especially compared to your other works, it feels a lot aesthetically freer, and you have this sort of weaving, almost dreamlike camera, especially in a lot of the exterior scenes. So I was wondering, assuming that was part of this, you know, sort of challenge you set for yourself, or that was set for you, what was your guiding credo while you were on set in terms of finding this rhythm, this sort of visual poetry?
It's, you know, when I set out to do this film, I told myself, stop controlling. Stop being that control freak. You know, like
old.
I couldn't stop myself. I was thinking, like,
The Prime Minister was assassinated by two of her own bodyguards.
This film, but it's not possible. It's an Anthony Chen
The
film.
men wore
You know, I'm
turbans,
Singaporean.
just
you know,
like
if you
me.
know a Singaporean, they need a blueprint. You know, like they're so sort of like.
My family and
you
I
know,
practice a
it's
religion
so
called
by the
Sikhism.
numbers, you know, like
In our
everything has to
faith,
follow a
all
plan.
men and even some
And I told
women
myself,
wear a
stop
turban.
doing that. Stop doing that.
It symbolizes our belief
So
that all
there
people
was a
are
script
created
for the
equal.
film, but I told myself.
But after that
this is gonna be a
assassination,
film where
our
I'm
turbans
gonna
made us
find-
targets.
You know, when you're lost and
Angry
stuck in your
mobs
life, right? Whether
hunted
it's
and murdered
creative
thousands of
practitioner
Sikhs.
or whatever it is, or it's, you know, like spiritually, you need to find
No
a
part
way
of me
out.
felt
And in order to find
Indian
your way out, you need to
anymore.
not go back to the old way of doing things. And for me, the rule for me was, you know, whatever you used to do before.
I was born in Washington, D.C.,
Don't do it.
the first
So-
American citizen in my family.
The first thing I did
My
was,
parents raised
I'm
me
not
and my
gonna
brother
make this
there,
film
while
like
my
home,
dad
my
was
home
working at the
country,
Indian
because
embassy.
I know the
But
crew,
after a
I
few
know the
years,
place really well.
my parents
I really-
missed their
you know, I
community.
would know which actors
So they
I would
decided to
cast.
pack up
So I
and
told
must to
myself,
India.
okay, I'm gonna make it in a foreign place. You know, I've always wanted to make a film in China.
As a teenager, I dreamt of being back in America
Very, very curious about
and
it.
immerse myself
And I
in
told
American
myself,
culture.
I grew up in a
As soon as I turned 18,
country
I
where
was on
it's
the next
really
plane
hot,
back.
you know, it's summer
My name
all
is
year round.
Vishwajit
I told
Singh,
myself,
and I am an American Sikh.
my producing partner, we're gonna go to the do a proper picture. So I was literally,
Finally,
I was working with a
I was
crew,
home.
a bunch of actors I've never worked with.
It was beautiful.
I was the only Singaporean on set. Everyone was from China. It was really putting
But
myself
I didn't receive the warm
outside
welcome
the comfort zone.
I was expecting.
This is the first film ever
I never felt
where I've got
so alone.
musical score in it. My first film and second film has no music. You know, you have got diegetic music. You might have music coming out of the radio, and that was it. But
I decided to do
and that was
what no
and
one
I
in
had
my
no
family
idea, right? The first time I
had
used
ever
music,
done.
and there was so much music. You know, and I was finding it. I was finding the spirit of youth, and
When my
I really enjoyed
father
making this
found
film.
out,
I didn't
he
hear that.
refused to
I
speak
really,
to
you know,
anyone
it's the most
for
pleasurable
weeks.
experiences. You know, like
Cutting my hair and abandoning my
I felt
turban
like
meant I
I
was
felt
no longer
young
sick.
again making the film. You know,
But
when you watch
fitting
the
in
film,
presented a new challenge.
there are three people.
I
in the film,
didn't know
really there
what was
four.
anymore.
And there are three people in front of the camera.
I began
they're
trying
going on
different
the journey.
identities,
You know, there are lots of
religions.
stuff. They're finding some kind
None
of
felt
spiritual
quite right.
freedom. You know, they're making sense of, you know,
After
who they
10
are,
years of searching,
what they should be
I had a
in the
dream
world.
one morning.
And then there's, you know, behind the camera, I'm
My
on
grandfather
on my
came to
journey
me
as well.
with the 6
And it was
scriptures.
so fun. We were shooting in the day. And thank God for winter because
The opening
the sun
words
sets at like
describe a
4 or 5.
timeless and formless
So all of a sudden you
energy
have a lot of time
that
at
binds
night,
all
you know,
living beings.
you're checking out like eating places, you know, we're
The
drinking,
purpose of
like,
the sick
life that you
faith
saw
is to
in-
connect to
on
that
screen
energy.
was our life
And for
behind
the
the
first
camera.
time,
But
I
it wasn't
felt
3,
it.
it was 4. It was with me,
I felt a new desire to stand out as myself rather than blend in as no one.
and I felt young again. I don't know if
But
people
being
feel this, but during
myself
the pandemic,
was about to get a lot
you
more
just
difficult.
feel so old and tired. And you just feel like you're fading away, you know, and you're becoming an old man. And all of a sudden, like I found youth again, and that was one of the most amazing things on this journey.
That's lovely. We're going to open it up to the audience in just a second, but before that, I have a very important question because I found
Within
something
hours,
in
there
this
was
film
news of
maybe
6 being attacked.
You chew ice.
I don't, but interestingly, there was a scene in the film where he's in the club and he's chewing the ice and takes out the ice. So that was my personal experience, and I wrote that into the film because when I decided to make this film, you know, some of my friends, they said, you know, Anthony, you're not that young anymore, right? And sadly, you know, I'm turning 40 next year, and I'm having a bit of a midlife crisis right now.
I don't
Yeah,
feel
I
at
feel like I
home
went
anymore.
into one existential crisis and walking into another existential crisis. No thanks to the state of cinema right now.
Just make another movie, it's fine.
Yeah, but what happened was a group of friends, young friends in the 20s, they said, you want to make a film about young people.
I used to be
This is how
seen
young
as an
people live."
outsider,
You know, and
but now
so they brought me into a club
people
in
see me
Beijing.
as a villain.
I've never, you know, maybe I'm a bit beyond my years. You know, I'm a little bit too mature.
I got a
And
strange idea.
I've stopped going into a club for a long time.
If I'm going to stand
So
out,
I went into
I
a club for
want
the first
people to
time
see
in
me
13 years.
not as an outsider, but as I
And
am,
it was so
is
awkward
sick
because
and
people were
an
sort of
American.
dancing and drinking, and I was just sitting on the sofa, sitting on the couch, and I didn't know what to do. It was so awkward, and I was just staring at this box of art.
For the first
all the
time,
alcohol, and I was just
I
looking at
became
it,
sick
looking at it.
Captain
And I started to
America.
take, you know, an ice cube out, and I started to put it in my mouth, and I was chewing. I took it out. I was looking at it, and it started to melt, and it started to melt into my eyes, and it started to hurt my eyes, and I don't know why, but all of a sudden, it got me so emotional, and I just started crying like a baby. And that moment, because you see, it was so noisy, it was so crowded, but I felt so lonely and detached from everyone else. And that was what I wrote into the film.
That's lovely. I think we have time for a couple of audience questions as well, if anyone. Yes, you over there?
Hi, Anthony. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful film. I'm Katrina. I'm from China and I work in finance in Wall Street. So I love writing films in my scripts in my spare time. And one thing that I specifically am very interested in hearing from you is like the outside view to produce such an insider film. Because I live in the north part in China for a couple of years, and I have some friends and people that I know who live in Yanji, that area. And then based on your film, it feels like a really accurate description of their culture, life, and people, how they interact with each other, like the clubbing and wedding, and how they chewing the ice cubes. So I'm just wondering, like, what kind of prep work that you did to make sure that you really know their life and you're really able to accurately reflect their culture and vibes.
I wouldn't know better. The only way for me is to go in without any judgment, and that's how I make all of my films. I go in without any baggage. I go in without any judgment, and it's quite interesting. I discovered this city by accident. I've never been to the north of China. The furthest north I've been is Beijing, and I remember it's really odd. You know, I wrote the script in quarantine in Shanghai in a quarantine hotel where I was, like basically locked up for like 21 days. And because I knew I wanted to make a winter film, I've never been to the north. So I was looking literally at Google Maps because I knew that at the end of the film, in the third act of the film, I wanted them to go into, like wide open space, back to nature, back to the wilderness. I wanted them to go back to basics, to a certain purity. For me, it was very important. And what I did was, I was saying like, okay, where is this bit of this natural landscape? And I was looking at Google Maps, and I chanced upon this mountain called Changbai Mountain. It's called Pektu Mountain in Korea because it borders North Korea. Half of the mountain is in Korea, in North Korea, half of it is in China. And me and my producer, at the end of the quarantine, we flew there and we hiked up the mountain, and I saw this Heaven Lake for the first time. And it was so powerful and so surreal, and it felt so cleansing, that feeling. And I decided, okay, I'm gonna set the film there. And then I was looking back on the maps again, which are the nearby cities where you could drive to this mountain where it makes sense logically. And every other city, there was Jilin, there was like Changchun, and they felt very generic. And I discovered this city, Yanji, and it was a border city with North Korea. And I was just so fascinated by it. I've never been to a Chinese city where you're literally in China, but it doesn't feel like China. Like everywhere, whether is it shop signs, street signs, like buildings, apart from Chinese words, you had Korean words. Because even though the population, they were all Chinese citizens, but half of the population, they were of Korean descent because it was on the border. And when I went to the clubs, when you went to restaurants, it was playing, Korean pop songs, K-pop. And people were speaking Korean all the time. It was so surreal. And it made me feel this is the perfect place. This surreal, almost foreign-like city is the perfect place to set a film about, three young people that are lost and stuck in their lives. They're literally on the border of their lives. And that was it. I go in without any judgment. And everything that I discovered, everything that I saw, I wrote into the film.
All right, I believe that's all we have time for. But if you would like, you can stay back for a reception with Anthony. Do we have time for one more?
Oh, sorry.
All right.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, hi. I'm Aijo. I'm from Shanghai, and I'm a music composer. I mean, but actually, what I think you were talking about is called third culture. It's like you come from a place and you live in a foreign place, but you actually feel like you're from a third place. Because I went to expat schools when I was young, so that was the term they used to categorize all of us. But I guess a musical question for me is that I realized this film, musically it was not very dense, but it was very rhythmic, and it was very atmospheric, and I feel like the way you played with the rhythm of the film, the movement, with the music, it feels like dancing in a way. So I wonder like how you made the rhythm so intentional in the film.
I think I found the right composer. And it's quite interesting because I discovered this guy on Spotify. He's a fellow Singaporean. He's really young. When we started working together, he was 26. I was living in London at the time, and he was at music school in London at the time, and I was listening to his tracks. I was like, this guy is like really talented. I reached out to him. I met him for coffee, and he was like, "Oh, I'm such a fan of your work," and I said, "Okay, unfortunately, I don't use music in my films. One day when that happens, maybe I'll try and get you on." And this was a very spontaneous film. It really was me wanting to make a film post pandemic, and I wanted to capture that spirit of youth, the complexity of being young, and I knew I wanted a young person on board. I brought him on. He has never scored a feature film in his life. He has done like a few short films, and that was it. I brought him on when I was writing the script. As I was shooting, my editor, who's based in London, we would be sending the footage to her. She would be cutting, like 2 days later, I would have scenes. I would send it to the composer. He would write music, and he would send it through. And I was listening to his music on set, and I was watching these cuts with his music, and somehow he captured the spirit of the film. Like somehow he understood what it was. And it was the first time where, on the day when I wrapped the film, the day after when we assembled the film, we had an assembly of the film because we were cutting as we were shooting, 80% of the music was written. And after that, in post, I didn't change much of it. I had some notes here and there, but somehow he connected with those emotions. Maybe because he was in his 20s, he understood it. And I was, I think I was very, very fortunate. I was like, this film is so risky. I was trying so many things where it could fall flat. I'm going to share with you the story. Even with this kid, I had no idea. I hired him. He has never scored a feature film. I was thinking, what if it turns out badly? I was prepared to fire him at some point, if it turns out badly. But no, it worked really well. But this film was such a film of risk. I remember when I was developing it, when I was still writing the script, I phoned up the actors, these 3 actors, and I said, "Do you want to make a film?" And I asked, like, "Were you free? We're going to shoot in December." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, I'm free. And then I did my quarantine in Shanghai. And then when I came off quarantine, these 3 actors, they flew to Shanghai to meet me. And at that time, I haven't finished my script. And, we were there, having lunch in a Chinese restaurant. In China, the tables are huge, the big round tables. And they were there, and they were like, "Oh, so can we read the script?" I said, "I have no script." So I was literally telling them the story, about these 3 young people, and then, they got drunk, and they stayed over at the place, and then eventually they end up on the mountain, and they meet a bear. And they were so fascinated, and they were like, "What film is this?" Because for those of you who have seen like mainland Chinese films, this is not a mainland Chinese film. It's, they don't make films like that. And they were like, "Oh, it's so poetic. It feels poetic. It feels different. What is this?" And at the back, these 3 actors, sitting at the back were their managers, and you could see they were shaking their heads. They were like, because they were really famous in China, and they've together I think they have a combined box office of like $1 billion US. That's them, you know, and their films. But, you know, and it's the first time they've done an indie art house film. They've never made an art house film in their lives. So you could see their managers were like, this is such a bad idea, because you have no idea, like, we have never read the script, we don't know what this is, you know, like, they're all diving into this, and yeah, they're staking their reputations, and what if it turns out, and it's a really bad film? So I really thank the actors. You know, I felt like everyone that came on board, I had some of the best crew, like, on this film. You know, I had a great DP, I had the costume designer that worked for Diao Yinan and Jia Zhangke. I had the production designer that worked with Lo Ye for 2 films. I had the sound team that worked with Jia Zhangke for 20 years. I had some of the best people, and when they came on board, none of them had read the script. You know, like, I was literally pitching to them over coffee, and I was like, I know it sounds a bit crazy, but this is an adventure. Like, do you want to come? It's going to be cold, but I think it's going to be fun. And that was it. And it was great.
Well, thank you so much, Anthony. That's all we have time for, but please stay back for a reception, and make sure you tell everyone the movie comes out January 19th at the IFC.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.